Welcome to another tutorial. It's been a little while, but let's do this one. Today we're going to be making 3-color quarter square triangles. Not really very much different from making the scrappy 4-color quarter square triangles that we did a while back. The major difference here is that you got to be careful of your placement of your fabrics for your 3-color. But your measurements are the same and all that. The other difference is because it's a 3-color, we're going to be making them 4 at a time, not just 2 at a time. Again, general things we go over, standard things about my tutorials in case you haven't watched any of them before. As a general rule, my measurements I give you are exact. I don't write my patterns for you to make oversize and trim down, with the only exception I can only think of one exception, and this is not one of those times. I also have a distinct dislike for sewing unsupported bias edges. So instead of having you cut triangles and sew on a bias, which if you wanted to do these one at a time or whatever, you could cut triangles and sew on the bias, but then you risk stretching because bias edges stretch. So I have you cut squares or rectangles, and we make multiples at once instead of having unsupported bias edges. And standard practice for all quilt pattern writers, not just me, is to give dimensions in finished sizes. So if the size you're going to see after you sew it into your final project. So if we say we need a 3-inch block, whether it's a half square triangle or in this case a quarter square triangle, that is 3 inches after it's sewn into the project. So when you measure this, it's going to measure 3.5. That gives you your seam allowances. But after you sew it into your project, you measure it, it's only going to measure 3 inches. And so I normally give measurements in their finished sizes. So that is what we need to know about the standard things. Let's get started talking about the measurements for your quarter square triangles. So what you're going to need to do is figure out what is your desired finished size. In this case, I am making 3-inch quarter square triangles. All right, so take that 3-inch finished size, add 1.25 inch. In this case, 3 inches plus 1.25 is 4.25. Keep that measurement in mind. So now we're going to choose our fabric that has going to have 2 triangles in each half a quarter square triangle, or each. So that would be this brown fabric in this case. I need to cut 2 squares at that measurement we determined. In this case, it's the 4.25. And then I'm going to cut 1 square each of the gray and the green at 4.25 inches square. So after we get the cutting done, let's go to the cutting mat and the sewing machine and get started making these. On the back of each fabric A square, this is the fabric you have 2 squares of, draw a single diagonal line on the back of each one of those squares. Stack one of the fabric A squares on the fabric B square, right sides together, and stack the other fabric A square on the fabric C square, right sides together. Sew a seam 1/4 inch on either side of each drawn line on each stack of squares. Cut the 2 halves of each unit apart on the drawn line. Open each half square triangle unit. Press the seam allowances towards fabric A and trim the dog ears. You now have 2 pairs of matching half square triangles, 1 pair of fabrics A and B and 1 pair of fabrics A and C. So now let's turn those half square triangles into quarter square triangles. On the back of each fabric AB half square triangle, draw a single diagonal line which crosses the previous seam. And then stack 1 fabric AB square on top of 1 fabric AC square, right sides together, so that the seams nest. Make sure that the half square triangles are turned 180 degrees from each other so that the fabric A triangles are not laying directly on top of one another. So another 1/4 inch seam on either side of each drawn line on each stack of squares now. Now cut the 2 halves apart on the drawn line for each little stack that you've got there. Open each new 1/4 square triangle unit, press the seam allowances to one side, and trim the dog ears. All right, so I hope you enjoyed learning how to make 3 color 1/4 square triangles. Like I said, not very difficult at all. Just as a reminder, when you're making them in this manner, if you have a directional print, it's going to kind of show. I carefully made sure that on the directional print that I drew my diagonal line the same direction on the print so that they come out looking the way I want them to. You'll notice that on this directional print, some are going sideways and some are going up and down. That is the nature of directional prints because we're using all 4 edges of each square. If your fabric's not directional, no big deal. Don't need to worry anything about it. They'll all look identical. If you're using a directional print, you may need to be careful of what direction the print lies. Anyway, so that was our 3 color 1/4 square triangles made 4 at a time. Thanks for watching. Make sure you give me a thumbs up, write a comment, share it around, etc. And we'll see you the next time. Thanks for watching.